My friends, there comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes she's been pouring from an empty cup. She's been giving to her job, her children, her partner, her friends, and somehow she forgot herself. And what's worse is that society has applauded her for it, praised her for being selfless. But what they really meant was, you're doing a good job disappearing. We've been taught generation after generation that putting yourself first is wrong. That being bad for you is only bad. There's actually a poster that says that the job of the self is wrong. That to be a good woman, you must be everything for everyone all the time. But let me tell you something, that is a lie. A deeply embedded lie that keeps women tired, burned out, and emotionally bankrupt. The truth is, the most powerful thing a woman can do is turn her attention inward. Not out of arrogance, but out of survival. Focusing on yourself isn't neglecting others. It's remembering that you're human too. It's looking at your life and asking, what do I want? What do I need? What does joy feel like for me? And not feeling the need to justify the answers. Because when you ignore your own needs for too long, resentment starts to live in your spirit. And that resentment leaks into your relationships, your work, and your health. A woman who honors herself becomes magnetic. She moves differently. She walks into a room and doesn't need to announce her worth. You just feel it. And a woman who honors herself becomes magnetic. She moves differently. She walks into a room and doesn't need to announce her worth. You just feel it. And that confidence doesn't come from other people validating her. It comes from the quiet decision to reclaim her time, her energy, and her peace. She's not waiting for permission anymore. She's not begging to be chosen. She's already chosen herself. Self-focus is not an act of rejection. It is an act of resurrection. It's where you meet yourself again. After years of being lost in the roles you were expected to play, you remember the sound of your own voice. You reconnect with your dreams. Not the ones society handed you, but the ones that were buried under someday and maybe later. And here's the truth. When a woman decides to focus on herself, people get uncomfortable. They'll say you've changed. They'll ask why you're so distant. They might even call you selfish. But you'll learn to smile at that, because those who benefit from your silence and sacrifice will always label your growth as betrayal. So I want to say something that just didn't feel right. It feels wrong to label your growth as betrayal. Don't let that stop you. This world doesn't need more exhausted, bitter women pretending they're fine. It needs women who are full of life, full of truth, full of self-respect. And you can't get full by starving yourself of your own attention. You can't build a joyful life while constantly abandoning yourself to be accepted by others. So I want you to look at your reflection, not just in the mirror, but in your life, and ask, where am I on my own list? Not out of guilt, not out of ego, but out of love, out of reverence for the woman who has survived so much, given so much, and is finally ready to come home to herself. There's a quiet kind of strength that lives in women who no longer need to explain themselves. A strength that isn't loud or aggressive, but still commands the room. It's the kind of presence that comes from a woman who's made peace with her silence, who's learned that every word doesn't need to be said, every fight doesn't need to be fought, and not every opinion needs to be offered just to feel seen. We live in a noisy world, a world that constantly tells women to speak up, prove your worth, defend your choices, clap back, show up louder. But real power isn't found in shouting. It's found in restraint, in knowing that just because you can say something doesn't mean you have to. Silence is not absence. It is presence. It is the space where wisdom lives before it's ready to be spoken. There was a time when I used to fill every silence with words, thinking that if I stayed quiet, people would misunderstand me, or worse, forget me. But silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you intentional. It invites you to listen to the room, to your body, to your intuition. When you're quiet, you notice what's real. You hear between the lines. You begin to separate what is noise from what is truth. A woman who is at peace with her silence isn't ignoring the world. She's filtering it. She's choosing what's worth her energy. She's not avoiding conflict. She's protecting her peace. That kind of silence isn't passive. It's powerful. It is a woman saying, I don't owe you a reaction, and I don't need your permission to be at peace. People get uncomfortable when a woman becomes silent, especially if she used to be loud. They start to wonder what happened to her. But what they don't realize is that her silence is often the sound of growth. It's the pause before the breakthrough. It's the space where she's building something deeper, something rooted, unshakable. You see, silence is where the spirit gets clear. It's where answers rise. It's where wounds speak softly and start to close. And when a woman learns to sit in her own silence without fear, without trying to escape it, fill it, or numb it, she becomes a force. Because there is nothing more unmovable than a woman who no longer fears her own inner stillness. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing a woman can do is go quiet. Not because she's defeated, but because she's focused. Not because she's silenced, but because she's saving her voice for what truly matters. There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but there is divinity in knowing when not to. The world may not understand a silent woman because the world has grown used to women performing their worth. But when a woman finally stops performing and simply becomes, her silence becomes sacred. It becomes her sanctuary. It becomes the place where her next chapter begins. There is something you begin to understand deeply once you've been drained enough times. Your energy is your greatest currency. Not your time, not your money, not your talent. Your energy, your presence, your spirit, your emotional availability. That is what truly fuels everything. And once it's depleted, everything else begins to collapse with it. We don't always realize we're spending it until it's gone. A conversation that leaves you emotionally raw. A friendship that takes and never gives. A workplace that expects your excellence, but doesn't honor your humanity. These things don't just cost time, they cost spirit. And the more freely you give your energy away without reflection, the more you wake up wondering why you feel so heavy, so disconnected, so tired in places sleep can't reach. You can always earn more money. You can always make more plans. But your energy once spent takes time and intention to restore. And not everyone deserves a withdrawal from you. Not every situation is worth your light. There are people who thrive on your chaos. People who only come alive when you're overextending yourself. You have to ask yourself, what am I fueling that is slowly killing me? A woman who knows the value of her energy starts treating her peace like a private account. She doesn't make emotional loans to people who've shown they can't pay her back with respect. She doesn't bankrupt herself trying to keep people comfortable. She watches where her energy goes, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because once you've burned out and had to rebuild yourself, you become sacred about your flame. You start paying attention to how you feel around people. Not just what they say, but what they draw out of you. Do they leave you lighter or do they drain your joy? Do you feel safe or do you shrink to be tolerated? When your energy is strong, you attract peace. When it's scattered, you attract noise. That's not about luck, that's about alignment. It's easy to get addicted to proving your worth through busyness, through constantly showing up, saying yes, fixing everything. But productivity without purpose is spiritual debt. It looks good from the outside, but inside you're overdrafted. And the truth is, you don't owe everyone your accessibility. You don't owe everyone your story, your effort, your response. Some things can be left unanswered, and that is still love for yourself. You have a right to protect your energy like the rare, radiant thing that it is. To say no without guilt. To step back without explanation. To choose peace over performance. Because how you spend your energy is how you shape your life. And if your spirit is the source, then your boundaries are the bank. The moment a woman begins to honor the cost of her presence, the emotional, mental, spiritual labor that she's been giving out for free, she stops negotiating her value. She no longer pours herself into cups with holes in them. She becomes intentional, discerning, rooted because she knows that what she fuels, she feeds, and what she feeds grows. There is a kind of healing that doesn't happen in a room full of people. It doesn't happen with applause, with advice, or with attention. It happens when a woman sits with herself not to escape the world, but to face it within her. It happens when she stops running, stops performing, and finally allows herself to feel what she's been avoiding for years. The cells she has to deal with herself, and it has to be faced within her for years. Solitude isn't loneliness. That's one of the greatest misunderstandings we've been taught. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection. Solitude is the decision to reconnect, not with the noise around you, but with the voice inside you. It's where you begin to hear your own truth again. the one that got buried under the expectations, the obligations, and the pressure to be okay all the time. There's a sacred stillness in being alone that allows the soul to breathe. When you're not constantly absorbing the emotions of others, you begin to untangle your own. You start asking different questions. Not why did they hurt me, but why did I stay? Not what did I lose, but what am I learning? These aren't easy questions, but they're necessary, and they don't get answered in noise. In solitude, the grief comes up, the old wounds, the buried memories, the shame you thought you left behind. They all rise, not to punish you, but to be released. Because healing doesn't come when you suppress your story. It comes when you stop being afraid to tell it to yourself, to sit with it, to cry through it, to stop editing your own pain just to seem strong. Sometimes the most profound breakthroughs don't look like strength, they look like silence. They look like waking up and deciding not to pretend anymore. They look like saying no to invitations, turning your phone off, sitting on the floor in your living room, and letting your heart ache. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of real transformation. That's the kind of work no one sees, but it changes everything. There is no timeline for healing. The world will tell you to move on. Your friends will mean well and say, just let it go. But only you know what it feels like to carry what you carry. Only you know the weight you've held behind your smile. And in solitude, you give yourself permission to carry it differently, to stop dragging it behind you and start honoring it as part of your becoming. When you stop seeking external fixes for internal wounds, you start creating space for your own medicine. You stop waiting to be saved and start becoming your own sanctuary. And from that place, healing isn't just about what gets better. It's about what gets reborn. Your voice, your self-respect, your capacity to trust yourself again. These things don't grow in crowds, they grow in quiet. A woman who has healed in solitude walks differently. She may not speak loudly, but her presence is undeniable, because she carries the kind of peace that wasn't given to her. She built it herself in the dark when no one was watching. There comes a time in a woman's life when she realizes that being liked is not the same as being whole. That fitting in doesn't mean you're free. And that approval, as seductive as it is, often comes at the cost of your authenticity. You start to ask yourself, who am I when I'm not performing for acceptance? For so long, women have been conditioned to shrink and shapeshift for approval, to soften their edges, to be agreeable, to keep the peace even when it costs their peace. We've been praised for being easy to love, not hard to ignore. But there's a difference between being loved for who you are and being tolerated for who you pretend to be. And that difference is alignment. Alignment is when your life starts to reflect your values, not someone else's version of them. It's when your words match your actions and your spirit stops feeling split in two. You don't wake up feeling like you're living two lives anymore. The one that looks good and the one that feels true. You wake up knowing you're rooted in your truth, even if that truth makes people uncomfortable. There's a quiet cost to chasing approval. You start to abandon yourself in pieces. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh at things that hurt you. You bite your tongue when your spirit is screaming. And after a while, you don't recognize the woman in the mirror. She's been edited so many times she's become a stranger to her own soul. But the moment you choose alignment over approval, everything shifts. You stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I like how I feel around them? You stop auditioning for love that requires you to shrink. You stop dressing your truth up just to make it more digestible. Because the version of you that lives in alignment doesn't beg, she attracts. Not because she's trying, but because she's true. Living in alignment doesn't mean you won't disappoint people. You will. You will outgrow people who only knew the version of you that put them first. You will lose relationships that were built on your silence, but you will gain something far greater. The peace of not betraying yourself just to belong. You will learn that the love worth keeping never requires your self-abandonment. When a woman chooses alignment, her boundaries change. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She doesn't need to over-explain, over-apologize, or overcompensate anymore. Her no becomes complete, her yes becomes intentional. She stops negotiating her worth in rooms she was never meant to sit quietly in, because now she's not trying to fit in. She's learning to stand firm. Approval will always be conditional. It shifts with opinions, expectations, in other people's comfort zones. But alignment is solid. It holds even when the crowd leaves. It grounds you when the applause fades. It whispers, "You are enough," even when no one else is clapping. There is something remarkable that happens when a woman begins to rise, not just in status or income or position, but in consciousness, in truth, in self-respect. She doesn't just elevate herself, she lifts the energy of every room she enters. She shifts conversations. She inspires boundaries. She invites others to heal simply by being a mirror of what is possible. When a woman chooses to rise, she sends a silent signal to every woman watching. You can do this too. You don't have to stay small to be safe. You don't have to suffer to be seen. You don't have to earn love by sacrificing yourself. Horizon becomes a blueprint, a lighthouse, a quiet revolution that begins not in crowds, but in her own private decision to stop dimming her light. Rising is not about being better than others. It's about being better for yourself so that the people around you are no longer fed from your depletion, but inspired by your wholeness. When you rise, your children witness what self-worth looks like in action. Your friends start holding themselves to higher standards. Your boundaries teach others how to honor theirs. Your healing becomes contagious. But rising is not always graceful. It often begins in silence, in isolation, in shedding skin that once felt like protection. Sometimes it looks like walking away from what you once begged to stay. Sometimes it looks like failure. But behind the scenes, something is being built. Not louder, but stronger. The woman you're becoming is not just for you. She is a foundation others will stand on. You don't always see the ripple effect of your rising. The girl who watched you speak up in a meeting and finally found her own voice. The friend who saw you leave a toxic relationship and realized she could leave hers. The sister who watched you rest without guilt and finally gave herself permission to breathe. The girl who watched you rest without guilt and finally gave herself permission to breathe. Your rising teaches without preaching. It liberates without force. And when you rise, your standards rise too. What you tolerate, what you allow, what you settle for, all of it begins to shift. And as you step into your power, the people who truly love you rise with you. They don't resent your glow, they reflect it. They celebrate your expansion because it reminds them of their own. You stop attracting people who need your silence and start attracting people who honor your voice. There will be those who misunderstand your rise, who feel threatened by it, who try to tether you to old versions of yourself because your evolution makes them question their comfort. Let them. Your rise is not a rejection of anyone else. It's a return to yourself. And the more rooted you are in your truth, the less responsible you feel for managing other people's discomfort with your growth. Every step you take in the direction of your truth lifts something in the world. Every time you choose love over fear, wholeness over performance, faith over doubt, you shift the collective frequency. You become a living reminder that it is never too late to return to yourself, never too late to rise from where you were planted, and never too much to want more than survival.